Hello, fancy meeting you here. Kind of, like it's my channel. So, hey, I guess more specifically, fancy meeting you at this angle. I promise. It's right there. It's right there. I promise. I have been thinking about this for a while, and it's something that's been increasingly sort of like clawing at me, especially with recent events, which have been not great. I want to talk to you about the way that I view current events and like what I'm doing and why I'm here to begin with. This is sort of like a one-off ad hoc video. Like I don't really have a reason aside from I'm seeing people doing things that indicate that I'm not really coming across the way that I hope to be. And that's not a blanket statement. It's just like, I want to clarify. I started doing this at all because I didn't like the relationship between most people and most news. Most people that I know either hate the news, hate journalists, don't want to keep up with things or whatever, or they're just beaten down by it. And they're just every single thing is just destroying them. And that's by design. Like the number of times that I remember growing up as a kid and like seeing the ads, remember the ads for like, I guess they still do this, like more at 11 kind of ads, right? Like shocking headline, more at 11. Or it would just be like, this many people died today in these horrific ways. I just remember being a kid and like Good Morning America would be on. And they'd just be talking about everyone that died because that's what keeps your attention. Keeping you scared keeps your attention. Keeping you questioning, keeping you going back to that source because they are the one that you trust and they abuse that relationship. The psychology behind it is very great for their ratings and really, really bad for your mental health. Now, obviously, I'm not doing a whole lot to like sugarcoat things and like make things more digestible, I guess, but I'm specifically not trying to scare you. It is why I take the approach that I do to talking about current events. I talk about it as if it's just like a whack-ass thing, because most current events are just whack-ass things. But specifically, I'm not trying to blow things out of proportion into a situation where you feel like if you don't keep your eyes peeled and watching everything that happens next, then you're in danger, you're a bad citizen, you're whatever. Like, that's so toxic. And I'm speaking from experience. This is not just me pontificating. This is what I went through. I went through a really, really rough patch where I was glued to headlines and I was glued to the everyday beat of things that were going on, as I'm sure a lot of people have fallen into. And it made me real upset. I was getting angry constantly, and I was just mad all the time. And I would just be sitting there in anger, accomplishing nothing but just being angry. Doom scrolling, right? Like just doom scrolling. I would be like scrolling through the comments of some news post or whatever and just getting more angry at the responses and just either people would be leaning in and being like, you should also be mad because of X, Y, and Z, or people would be pushing back and being like, people who are mad about this are pansies, blah, 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 blah. And then that's just trying to rile you up in a completely different way. Don't read news comments. Eventually it became too much. And there was just like no way I would have been able to continue on that way. I was spiraling and it wasn't good. And I don't want any of you to feel that way, especially when watching my content. And I hope that I've accomplished that half. That's just gonna be like an ongoing struggle to maintain. But I've been getting an increasing number of comments, mostly on the TikTok side, where people seem to want it to be that way. Now, I don't think that it's a malicious thing. I don't think that it's people wishing for more hatred in their life. I think there's just an understanding or a belief maybe that if you are following current events, if you're following news, you're outraged just because that's how it's been. Now, I want to clarify, I am outraged and like you should be too. It's not like I'm not, but like I don't need to scream at you to make that clear. I don't think that does anything but also rile you up. And so with that sort of like rambly intro out of the way, I'm gonna go to a video section. A section title, I am not a journalist. I'm not, and I don't like being called one, and it's insulting to journalists to call me a journalist. Let's talk about journalism, because journalism is not bad. It's the journalists are not bad. When people are getting mad about like journalists, just the journalism, they're usually mad about corporate media, like corporate stuff, where there's an editorial point of view that's driven by money and not understanding. There's a really dangerous phenomenon that I've noticed, especially like now that I'm on the other side of content creation and receiving a lot of comments. I see what people are saying. And there's definitely people who truly believe that just journalist is equivalent to a liar. And if your instinct at that was to like joke that that's true, that's why those people feel that way. There are people who kind of know what they're talking about and crack jokes and whatnot, and are maybe in on it. Maybe they know that it's not every journalist is bad and they know the nuance around it, but the blanket joke leads other people to just think that's just how it is. And then you have people who are impressionable who just internalize that concept and then just refute any notion of a like classic journalist. And I want to be super, super clear. Everything that I talk about is based on actual journalists' work, with the exception of like finding primary sources and referencing them myself and reading them myself. I try to do that for like bills and court cases and statements and whatnot. But on the ground reporting, it's not like I'm going around the world and doing on the ground reporting and whatnot. That's journalists. And that's not even mentioning like investigative journalism and like criminal investigative journalism. Essentially, the people who use journalism and free speech to do the job that cops are supposed to do. They run exposés on criminals. Often those criminals are businessmen, where cops are paid to protect capital. Journalists, they make a name for themselves when they disrupt capital. Not infrequently, it leads to their execution. Cough, cough, the Panama Papers. And so that's what I'm talking about when I'm saying like, hey, I don't like being called a journalist. It's like insulting to journalists, because there are people who are really putting their literal life on the line. And they've got way more talent than I do at actually finding the story and following it to a conclusion. What I do, I think, is more akin to like commentary and aggregation. I'm at best a pundit. I hate that. Next section title. The section title is sometimes shit is whack. As I said, I was in a really dark place from just consuming nonstop headlines and rage bait and all of that. And I would just rile myself up every single day and night. I would doom scroll. I would get mad at what I'm seeing. I would see comments. I would get mad at the comments. I would see reactions. I would get mad at the reactions. I wanted to be mad. It got to the point that that was what my comfort space was getting outraged. But it turns out that just sitting around and getting outraged does absolutely nothing. It is the like functional equivalent of armchair activism, but you're not even doing the activism part. It's just the armchair. It just makes you like an armchair sack of rising blood pressure. This is going great. I wish I could explain this in better detail, but the thing that changed for me was I had like a literal epiphany. I was laying in bed and I realized that I can't keep doing this to myself. And I realized that the things that were making me angry were words on a page. Now, obviously, those words on a page might be saying things like a genocide is happening funded by your tax dollars. That's going to make me a little cranky in the morning, to understate it about 1,000,000,000%. But to give this stupid fucking device that much power, right? To give anything with a screen the power to boil your blood and have nothing come of it is not good. I frequently will say, like, take that anger and channel it into something productive. Direct action, working with mutual aid groups, improving the quality of life for those around you. That is the ideal, right? But the first step is to control the effects that it has on you, because you're not going to be able to take that energy and reroute it if you're just consumed by it. And so the first step I took was to take all the comments, all the discussion, all the meta narrative of everything. I started to view that the way it probably should be seen, in my opinion, which is through a distant lens, which is to say, take a step back and acknowledge that these are just words on a page, probably written by someone who forgot they even wrote it in the first place. was probably a passing comment. It's the equivalent of fiction. You don't know who wrote this. You don't know what kind of background or education or anything about them. They could be a ChatGPT plugin who was told to make the most infuriating reply just to egg people on. Who knows? And so taking everything with the understanding of like, this is text on a page. This is just text on a page. It can't hurt me. That helped me a ton. And that helped me to detach a little bit. I don't think it's great to detach completely, but detach enough that you can manage. Obviously, shit can get real bad, and that's not great. And obviously, there are certain people who have an incredible level of privilege, and that privilege allows them to have more space to not pay attention. But here's something about privilege, and this is another thing that I struggled with for quite some new section: privilege. Privilege. It's not something to be ashamed of. It's not something that is a failure of your own right. I am a cis white guy. I won the lottery. As a part of letting all those words get to me after a while, the number of times that I saw like, oh, look at what men have done again, and internalize that as like, it's personally my fault because of my privilege, and I should be ashamed of who I am. That is not the message. That's not the message. That is a slightly distant but functional equivalent to seeing a post saying like, yes, all men, and being like, but not me. It's not about the individual. It is about the abstract concept. And so you, the individual, yes, may have privilege and may be benefiting from that. That's not your fault. Being aware of it in the first place is doing way more than the average person. But privilege isn't something to be ashamed of. It is something that can be wielded as a tool to do the right thing. I am more likely to be heard in a room full of men than most other people. And so if I'm in a room full of men and the topic is shifting towards some shitty stuff, it's on me to use that privilege that I have to assert, hey, y'all, that's not okay. It's a responsibility, if anything, but it's not something that you need to repent for. That's why I try to be very loudly supportive of marginalized people. It's why I'm so loud about trans rights. I want other people who look like me and can identify with me to understand that there are other ways of thinking that are more open and supportive and community oriented. And that is one of the things I'm trying to do with the privilege that I have. And I'm not perfect at it, but I'm trying. This was sort of like a ad hoc bonus section. So we're gonna like reel it back and we're gonna go to, what's this next section I've got written down? Fear. I don't want to do it at you. I don't want to do a fear in your direction because that's not helpful. I am not here trying to scare you. I am not here trying to be like, oh my God, have you seen this thing that's happening? Can you believe it? I am not trying to stoke your outrage. I'm trying to note what is going on that matters to note so that we can have the context that we need to move forward. That's why I tend to say things like, so, you know, or as expected, blah, 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 or we knew this. I use those phrases a lot in my videos because it's not supposed to be surprising. These things are happening, but most of them make sense because why wouldn't they happen that way? They've always been happening that way, and they continue to happen that way. And if nothing is changing, they're going to continue to happen that way. And so again, looking back to the whole getting outraged by words on a page, if you look at a headline and it says, bad thing happened in place where bad things happen by people who do bad things. Yeah, again, you can still be outraged and you should still be outraged. I'm not saying ignore it, who cares? I'm saying that's nothing. That doesn't help anything. It's because of this that I virtually never cover something like, did you see what this politician tweeted? Because who cares? Well-documented asshat says asshat thing. That's the headline. That is not policy. That is bloviation. That is the capital P politics. That is the WWE cage match. It's what they're doing to keep people riled up. And behind the scenes, they don't give a shit. They're all in on it. people in Congress are buddy-buddy. All of that anger, all of that yelling at each other back and forth, that's for show. That's for us to eat up. That's for news organizations to get clips for, to make people angry again. And so I don't cover that stuff. And I very frequently get people saying, oh my God, you should cover this thing. Did you see this thing over here? Almost exclusively, the things that I get sent to cover are things that just don't pass my litmus test. I'll sometimes get people asking me why I didn't cover a certain thing. And it's just, most of the time it's because there's no way I can cover everything. But the other portion of the time, it's because I chose not to. Because it's not what I think is useful. And if I'm wrong, I don't know, it's my show. I can still just kind of feature what I want to feature. But like, I can't show everything. I have built a way to identify what I think is worth my time and energy to bring to people. What I try to focus on instead is accountability, making sure that anything egregious that's happening with companies or actual crimes gets talked about. Fun shit, like weird stuff that's like, I didn't even know that could happen on this planet. Cool. The weather. I'm really good at it. And obviously a good heist here and there. But news is inherently human. It is messy. It is confusing. And it's a thing we like. We want to know what's going on. It's just like an inherent, well, most people, it's just like an inherent thing. Understanding context. And so when we're talking about what is happening in the world, I don't think it should be through the lens of a corporatized media entity. And that's what most people get mad about when they're talking about journalists, is corporate media. And so I want to be able to take these stories, contextualize them in a way that's consumable and understandable, but won't push you towards insanity, because that's not the goal. That shouldn't be the goal. Informing people should not result in those people becoming catatonic. I instead want people to feel empowered, because I'm hoping that we are able to see the world around us, understand the impacts that we're able to have. And as long as we can continue to shine light on things, who knows what could be accomplished. I guess what I'm trying to say is it's an extremely uphill battle versus some very entrenched powers, and people who are much braver than I am have lost their lives in that battle. And one of the best things you can do as a consumer of like news adjacent content is to just internalize, share, understand, and don't let it get you to the point of just having your blood boil, to the point of just being angry and feeling defeated like you can do nothing. Because at that point, it's the functional equivalent of that husk of carbon sitting in front of a TV playing Fox News all day long. It's the same person. Only that person will reliably vote and make the system worse, and is not great. Speaking of which, final section. Let's talk about the baseline. The baseline is what I refer to as my sort of like bar for what I'll even entertain. Not even just news stories, just engagement with a concept. I do not believe it is my job to convince super far right people to change their ways. I don't think that that's a thing that a single person can do, and it's certainly not my job. And to that end, I don't think that my life or the life of pretty much anyone I care about is made any better by engaging with those people. That baseline basically means, like, if you don't think that trans people deserve rights, the rest of your opinions are void to me. I don't care what words you have to say, because you've proven that from the jump, you're not operating in good faith. So I have nothing to gain. Goodbye. Nazi shit, just like any kind of far-right mentality. It is not worth even engaging with. That is a waste of my breath. It is hard enough to convince people who are like left of center to consider that maybe there's a little bit more than just being left of center they can explore. But people who are far right and people who would do something like use the cudgel of the state to enforce a specific way of life onto you, nope, non-starter. You don't argue with fascists, because an argument implies that there is grounds for them to stand on, and there's not. Arguing with a fascist legitimizes them. There's exactly one appropriate action for fascists, but that'll have to be posted elsewhere. Said another way, we can't have a conversation about climate change with people who don't believe it exists. We are so far and beyond that conversation. It doesn't matter anymore. It doesn't matter if someone doesn't believe in it. If someone doesn't believe in it, bye. You are, yeah, okay. You have told me that you're a person that's not worth caring about. Goodbye. Us adults over in the real world have actual problems that need to be solved. And we can't be constantly reaching out and dragging you along with us. And that's what I mean by the baseline. I will just not engage with that shit. I used to be that guy. I used to be a person who harbored views like that. There was a point in time in my life where I truly didn't believe climate change existed. I was like 13, I think. But I held some other shitty views up through like my teenage years. I was a teenage white boy. That's what happens. But hey, here's an interesting thing. I grew the fuck up. I met new people. I experienced new things. I learned more about the world, and I understood that I wasn't at the center of it. Wild. And once I came to all those conclusions, things started to change pretty significantly. And so when I see people parroting those same beliefs that I used to hold on to because I didn't have enough life experience, the only thing I can think is you are too immature to even consider an adult. And so goodbye. I have no interest in anything else that you have to say. And so I guess in conclusion, I don't want to scare you. I'm not trying to. And I really hope that you're able to see what I'm doing here. Taking stories, even if they're rough, making them approachable, because it is important for people to stay up to date with just general goings-ons and to have an understanding, especially about what companies are doing and what politicians are doing, the actual actions they're taking, not what they're tweeting. It's important to know those things. If you don't, then you're just letting them win. But also, it's a lot of work. I mean, I do this. Like, this is what I do. It's a lot of work. No one person is expected to keep up with literally everything. That's ridiculous. And you don't need to be an expert on everything either. That's why I don't tend to go super, super deep into every single story. Largely, it's just like, hey, this thing happened. That's more or less all you need to know. And if you want to learn more, if it's interesting to you, definitely go dig in. But like, again, you probably have like mouths to feed. It is unrealistic for you to know every detail about everything that's happening. But if you have a general understanding of the gist, you're probably fine. And if it does trigger your interest to go research more, wonderful. All right. I'm talking a lot. Thanks for hanging out. Expect some more videos of varying types on my channel. I am working on a handful of things that are outside the scope of just stuff keeps happening. So look forward to that. Let me know what you thought about this video. Take care. Be well. I'll see you Monday.